My stepsister, who has always struggled with loneliness and once broke down crying that she'd never find love, later tried to pursue my long-term boyfriend, and now my stepmother has actually asked me to give him up, temporarily, so Clara can have a chance, leaving me questioning my sanity, my family loyalty, and whether I'm wrong to refuse. My stepsister cried, certain she would never find affection. Later, she attempted to charm my partner, and my stepmother instructed me to relinquish him. As a 24-year-old woman, I must share this, as I frequently question my own sanity amidst these events. The main individuals involved are my stepmother Margaret, age 52, my stepsister Clara, age 22, my father, Daniel, age 55, and my boyfriend of 3 years, Ethan, age 26. To grasp the current situation, understanding our past is essential. Our journey began when I was 8 years old, with my biological mother's departure. She packed her belongings one morning while my father was at work and I was at school. Upon returning, I discovered a note on the kitchen counter, explaining she could no longer bear the responsibilities of motherhood. My father then had the difficult task of explaining to an 8-year-old why her mother would not be returning. For 2 years, he raised me by himself. When I reached 10 years of age, my father encountered Margaret during a parent-teacher conference. Her daughter, Clara, was in my grade level but attended a different educational institution. Clara was born with spina bifida and utilized a wheelchair. Margaret, recently divorced, worked as a substitute teacher to manage expenses. My father, meanwhile, ran a prosperous small plumbing enterprise. Margaret's presence in our home gradually increased. She would frequently invite Clara over for recreational visits, eventually leading to them staying for dinner. I remember feeling delighted to have another girl around, especially one who seemed so gentle. Clara exhibited shyness and quietness, yet consistently showed respect towards adults. Her large eyes created an impression that made you instinctively want to offer her protection. My father and Margaret exchanged vows when I was 12. Margaret resigned from her substitute teaching role because my father's flourishing business provided ample support for all of us. We relocated to a more spacious residence, designed with wheelchair accessibility for Clara. While my father dedicated long hours to his work, Margaret managed the household. Clara and I shared the upper floor, though her room was equipped with a stairlift. The initial years unfolded pleasantly. Margaret ensured I never felt excluded, even with Clara's greater need for attention due to her medical appointments and physical therapy sessions. She assisted me with school assignments, attended my soccer matches, and confirmed I had all necessary supplies for school. Clara and I maintained a reasonably good relationship. We watched films together. She helped me with mathematics, and I, in turn, supported her with English. At 15, I encountered Ethan during a summer program designed for young people with disabilities and their siblings. The camp organized activities blending typically developing children with those who had special needs. My attendance was for Clara's benefit, while Ethan was there for his younger brother, who has autism. Ethan, then 17, had already embarked on part-time employment while completing his high school studies. He displayed a gentle demeanor with Clara throughout the camp activities, often making her laugh heartily. She appeared more outgoing when he was present than with others. After the camp concluded, Ethan began visiting our home regularly. Initially, his friendship blossomed with Clara. In fact, she relished discussing literature and cinema with him. He treated her like any other teenager, not as someone deserving of pity. My father approved of him, appreciating his respectful nature and employment. Margaret appeared pleased that Clara had found a friend. Over the subsequent 2 years, Ethan became a consistent visitor. He would come by after school and on weekends. Clara always looked up eagerly when he arrived. She started inquiring about his next visit and became upset if his plans changed. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. My attention was consumed by my own high school pursuits and a part-time job at a clothing store. During my final year of high school, a noticeable shift occurred. Ethan occasionally began inviting me to spend time together without Clara. We started conversing more extensively when she was absent. He assisted me in preparing for my SATs and drove me to job interviews. One spring evening, as we sat on the back porch after Clara had gone inside, he confessed he had held feelings for me for some time, but wished to avoid creating an awkward situation, given our shared friendship. We commenced our relationship the summer before I departed for college. Clara's entire demeanor instantly changed. She grew irritable and curt towards me, especially when Ethan was present. She would monopolize his attention and became annoyed if he wished to spend time with both of us, or just with me. Margaret noticed this alteration and questioned me about it. I informed her I suspected Clara had developed a romantic interest in Ethan. Margaret nodded, stating she would address the matter with her. I enrolled in college 3 hours away, while Ethan remained in the local area, beginning full-time work at an auto repair shop. Clara started her senior year of high school. During my trips home, I noticed Clara remained cool towards me, but Margaret reassured me that she was simply adjusting to my college absence. Ethan and I sustained our long-distance romance for 2 years. He visited me at school whenever possible, and I returned home for holidays and weekends. We managed well, despite the distance proving challenging at times. Clara gradually softened towards me again, yet her behavior remained peculiar whenever Ethan was present. After graduating from college, I briefly returned home to seek employment. Ethan and I discussed cohabiting once I secured a stable job. That's when things again grew strange. Clara had recently begun community college, taking online courses for greater mobility convenience. She spent most of her time at home, and Margaret had started part-time work at the library. Clara constantly inquired about Ethan. When was he visiting? Could she contact him to ask something? Did I imagine he would want to watch a specific movie with her? One afternoon, Ethan stopped by while I was at a job interview. Upon my return, Dad pulled me aside, mentioning Clara was behaving unusually. She had suggested they watch a romantic film and tried to coax him into sitting closer to her on the sofa. When he maintained his distance, she burst into tears, claiming no one would ever love her due to her condition. Ethan felt sympathy, but explained he had fabricated an excuse to leave early. That evening, I informed Margaret about the incident. She listened, then stated she would handle it. She reminded me that Clara had limited social engagement and might not comprehend appropriate boundaries. I accepted this explanation and tried to be more understanding. 2 weeks later, I started working for a marketing agency in a neighboring town. Ethan and I found a small apartment we could afford together. Margaret's face paled when I shared news of our impending move. Clara began weeping and rushed to her room. My father appeared happy for us, but Margaret barely spoke for the remainder of the evening. Margaret's demeanor grew cold over the following month as Ethan and I made preparations to move. She often commented on my departure from the family and how much Clara would miss me. Clara fluctuated between completely ignoring me and being excessively dependent. She began attending more medical appointments and complaining of pain more frequently. A week before our scheduled relocation, Clara experienced what Margaret described as a panic attack. She hyperventilated and declared she could not bear my leaving. Margaret insisted on postponing the move until Clara felt more stable. My father supported Margaret's suggestion. Ethan felt frustrated, but he agreed to wait a few more weeks. Clara's episodes intensified in frequency during those weeks. Whenever relocation plans arose, she would experience breathing difficulties or complain of intense pain. Margaret booked additional doctor appointments, stating the physicians were concerned about Clara's stress levels. My father asked me to remain patient and understanding. This pattern persisted for 2 months. Each time Ethan and I attempted to schedule a move, Clara had a medical emergency, and Margaret would add that the doctors advised against making any significant changes in Clara's environment. I began to suspect the incidents were not entirely medical, yet I felt guilty for harboring such thoughts. Last month, Margaret approached me, requesting a private conversation. She expressed worry about Clara's mental well-being and mentioned that doctors had indicated Clara would benefit from Ethan's presence more often, as he tended to calm her. Margaret inquired if Ethan might spend more time at home, perhaps even moving into our spare room temporarily to assist Clara in adjusting to the changes. I told Margaret that Ethan was my partner, not Clara's caretaker, and that we had our own plans. Margaret's expression shifted. She voiced disappointment in my selfishness and my apparent lack of understanding regarding Clara's life struggles. She argued Clara also deserved happiness and that keeping Ethan away from her was cruel. That discussion bothered me for several days. When I informed Ethan about it, he was astonished. He stated he had never indicated romantic interest in Clara, and Margaret's proposal made him uncomfortable. Yesterday, the situation reached its climax. Margaret invited me to meet her at a coffee shop for a discussion. She seemed agitated, which was unusual for her. She started by recounting all she had done for me over the years, how she had treated me like her own daughter, and how she had always prioritized my needs. Then, she uttered something that chilled me to the bone. She revealed Clara was deeply in love with Ethan, and her medical episodes were genuine, but triggered by seeing Ethan with me. She explained Clara had told her she believed Ethan also liked her, but was only with me out of obligation since we had been friends earlier. Margaret then asked me to end my relationship with Ethan. She explained it would be a temporary sacrifice, allowing Clara to ascertain if she and Ethan were compatible. She promised that if their relationship did not work out, I could have Ethan back. She said this was my opportunity to repay her for all the years she had treated me like a mother. I stared at her for a long time, trying to comprehend her request. I informed her that Ethan was not an object to be passed around and that he had never expressed romantic interest in Clara. Margaret insisted that men did not always know what they wanted and that Ethan might surprise himself if he gave Clara a chance. Margaret burst into tears as I declined. She said I was selfish and failed to understand what it was like to witness my child suffer. She lamented that Clara might never find love because of her disabilities, but Ethan was kind enough to look past it. She implored me to consider what was best for our family. I departed the coffee shop without responding to her. I drove directly to Ethan's workplace and recounted everything. His reaction was swift and decisive. He described Margaret's request as inappropriate and manipulative. He told me he held no romantic feelings for Clara and never would. Now I am here at our apartment, which we finally secured last week despite the family drama, trying to determine my next steps. Margaret has been calling and messaging me frequently. My father telephoned this morning, asking why I was upsetting Margaret and what was so crucial that I couldn't compromise for Clara's benefit. I haven't told my father the exact nature of Margaret's request, as I doubt he would believe me. Margaret has always been skilled at portraying herself as the reasonable one, simply desiring everyone's happiness. I am also concerned about what will happen to Clara if everything comes out. But I cannot stop thinking about Margaret's request. The more I reflect on it, the more I realize this behavior has been occurring for years. All those instances Clara became distressed when Ethan and I spent time together. All the medical issues that conveniently arose as we attempted to advance our relationship. Margaret labeled me selfish for wanting my own life. Am I wrong to refuse Margaret's request? Is there a compromise I am overlooking? I cherish my family, but I do not believe I can relinquish my relationship to make Clara happy. Ethan has been nothing but kind to her, but that does not imply he owes her a romantic connection. I continue to debate whether I should inform my father of Margaret's intentions. A part of me believes he deserves to know, but I am also terrified it will fracture our family. Margaret has been a good stepmother to me in many respects, and I do not wish to cause her or Clara any unnecessary distress. How would you navigate my situation? Update 1. I did not intend to return so soon, but events have taken an unforeseen turn. My gratitude to everyone who responded to my initial post. Many of you felt I should disclose Margaret's request to my father, and your advice was sound. After posting, I spent several days attempting to formulate an approach. Margaret persistently called and texted, urging me to reconsider her plea. She started sending me articles about the difficulties disabled individuals face in finding love and the vital importance of family support. Clara was also messaging me, but her texts were different. She kept asking when Ethan would visit again, and if he had mentioned her. Ethan grew increasingly frustrated with the situation. He explained that the frequent family drama was harming our relationship and that we needed to establish some limits. He suggested I speak with my father and bring everything into the open. He was correct, but I kept delaying, fearing the potential consequences. Last Tuesday, someone else made the decision for me. I was at work when my father contacted me, upset and bewildered. He stated Margaret had informed him that Ethan and I had separated, and that Ethan was now interested in Clara. According to Margaret, I was being difficult and obstructing their new relationship. I was so stunned that I remained speechless for a moment. My father continued, adding that Margaret was concerned I was struggling to accept the change and might need some time away from the family to process it. He suggested I stay at Ethan's apartment for a while to allow everyone time to adjust. That is when I realized the extent of Margaret's deception. She had planned to force the issue by lying to my father and presenting it as a settled matter. I informed my father that Margaret had misled him and that Ethan and I were still very much together. He appeared perplexed and stated he would need to discuss the misunderstanding with Margaret. I left work early and drove directly home. Margaret and Clara were in the kitchen, and as I entered, they both fell silent. I asked Margaret why she had informed my father that Ethan and I had broken up. She grew uneasy and claimed there had been a misunderstanding. She stated she was speaking hypothetically about what might occur if I chose to prioritize Clara's needs. Clara sat at the kitchen table, glancing back and forth between us. I could tell she was aware of the unfolding situation, but I was uncertain how much Margaret had divulged regarding her plans. I asked Clara directly if Margaret had informed her that Ethan and I had separated. Clara nodded, saying Margaret had told her that Ethan would be spending more time with her and less time with me. That is when I discovered Clara was involved, at least partially. Margaret had been preparing her for the desired outcome, likely raising her expectations. I questioned Clara if she genuinely believed Ethan harbored romantic feelings for her. She became defensive, asserting that Ethan was always kind to her and had told her she was beautiful and intelligent. I asked when Ethan had said such things. Clara described interactions that seemed friendly and supportive rather than amorous. Ethan had never said anything untoward to her, but Margaret had clearly misinterpreted his generosity as romantic desire and shared her thoughts with Clara. When my father returned home from work, I wanted to speak with him privately. I recounted everything, from Margaret's request at the coffee shop to her falsehoods about Ethan and my breakup. My father listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. After I finished, my father remained silent for a long time. He then stated that he needed to hear Margaret's side of the story before making any judgments. He summoned Margaret into the room and asked her to explain what was happening. Margaret's narrative was completely different from mine. She claimed I was rude to Clara about her affection for Ethan and that I threatened to keep Ethan away from the family if Clara didn't stop having crushes on him. She clarified that she had merely suggested I consider Clara's sentiments when making relationship decisions, not that I break up with Ethan. She said I misunderstood and exaggerated her request. Clara corroborated Margaret's version of events. She claimed I had been rude to her about Ethan, and Margaret was only attempting to protect her. She stated she never requested Ethan and me to separate, but it upset her when I acted as if she wasn't allowed to have feelings. My father stared between us, evidently trying to discern the truth. He explained that this was a complicated scenario in which we all needed to calm down and find a way to cooperate. He recommended family counseling to help us communicate better. At that point, I understood Margaret had orchestrated this confrontation. She had prepared Clara with a story that depicted me as the antagonist and herself as a protective mother. She had undoubtedly been cultivating this narrative for weeks, knowing I would ultimately inform my father about our conversation. I informed my father that I would not be participating in family counseling because Margaret had already demonstrated her willingness to lie and manipulate the situation. I explained that I needed some time apart from the family to consider whether I wished to continue a connection with individuals who treated me this way. My father became enraged and accused me of being overly dramatic. He stated that families experience difficult periods and that walking away was not the answer. He accused me of being difficult and selfish, just as my biological mother had been. That comment struck me deeply. I had spent my entire youth striving not to resemble my original mother, who had abandoned us when circumstances became challenging. But I recognized that remaining in a position where I was being misled and lied to was not loyalty. It was simply tolerating mistreatment. I gathered my belongings and went to stay with Ethan. That was 2 weeks ago, and I have not returned to the house since. My father has called multiple times, wanting me to come home and discuss things. Margaret has sent messages apologizing for the misunderstanding and stating that she only desires what is best for everyone. Clara texted to ask why I am being so harsh to the family, but this is what truly upsets me. None of them have acknowledged what truly transpired. Margaret has not revealed that she asked me to break up with Ethan. Clara has not admitted that she hoped I would. My father has not admitted that Margaret lied to him about Ethan and my breakup. Instead, they are all acting as if this is just a family dispute that spiraled out of control. They want me to return and pretend nothing happened, to resume normality. But I cannot do it now that I understand Margaret's capabilities and how far she is willing to go to achieve her desires for Clara. Ethan has been absolutely supportive throughout this. He has made it clear that he wants nothing to do with Margaret's manipulation and is committed to our partnership. He has also offered to speak with my father personally about what happened, but I am not sure it would help at this time. The hardest aspect is that I still love my family despite everything that has transpired. Margaret cared for me for many years and was not always manipulative. Clara is my sister, even if she isn't handling this situation well. My father raised me and worked diligently to provide for our family. However, I am beginning to see that love does not imply condoning hurtful treatment. Margaret crossed a line when she asked me to relinquish my relationship for Clara's contentment. She broke another line when she lied to my father and attempted to manipulate the situation to achieve her goals. I do not know what will happen next. My father has stated that if I do not return home and resolve matters with the family, he will discontinue financial assistance for me. Margaret and Clara are acting as if I was the one who initiated this entire issue by being selfish and unforgiving. A part of me wonders whether I should just return and try to make peace. It would be easier than dealing with all the conflict and uncertainty. But every time I consider it, I recall Margaret sitting across from me in that coffee shop, asking me to break up with my boyfriend so that her daughter might have him. I recall the look in her eyes as she lied to my father about what had transpired. I cannot go back to pretending everything was fine. I cannot go back to avoiding Clara's emotions or accepting Margaret's manipulation as normal family dynamics. So, I guess I am seeking advice again. How do you rebuild your life if your family turns on you for refusing to be manipulated? How do you cope with the guilt of stepping away from people who claim they love you but do not respect your boundaries? Update 2. I wish I could say things improved following my last report, but they actually deteriorated significantly before getting better. I am writing for my new apartment, which I share with Ethan, and I finally feel like I can breathe again. After my last post, I was estranged from my family for almost 3 weeks. During that time, Margaret intensified her efforts to persuade me to return. She began calling my workplace, informing my supervisor that there was a family emergency and that I needed to get home immediately. When my supervisor relayed the messages, I had to explain that there was no emergency and my stepmother was being untruthful. Margaret also reached out to some of my college friends via social media. She told them I was experiencing a mental breakdown and requested them to convince me to return home. Several friends called me, concerned, and I had to explain the true situation to them. It was awkward and stressful. The worst aspect was what she did to Ethan. Margaret managed to obtain his work phone number and called his employer. She informed Ethan's supervisor that he had acted inappropriately with a disabled family member and that the family was considering filing charges. Ethan's employer summoned him to the office the next day for an uncomfortable conversation. Ethan had to describe the entire issue to his manager, including presenting text exchanges between us, proving we were in a committed relationship. Fortunately, his boss trusted him and recognized that this was a family dispute rather than a criminal matter. However, Ethan was shocked by the incident, which made us both realize the extreme lengths Margaret was willing to go. That experience convinced me that I needed to take more serious measures. I couldn't continue to live in limbo while Margaret tried to destroy my relationship and reputation. I resolved to write a lengthy letter to my father, outlining everything that had happened, including Margaret's initial request and all of her subsequent lies and manipulations. In the letter, I told my father that I loved him, but couldn't have a relationship with him if he kept enabling Margaret's conduct. I stated that I was willing to maintain a connection with him independently of Margaret and Clara, but only if he acknowledged what had transpired and stopped expecting me to tolerate Margaret's manipulation. I also sent a letter to Clara. I told her that I didn't blame her for having feelings for Ethan, but she needed to understand that those feelings did not give her the right to interfere in my relationship. I told her I wished she could find happiness with someone who genuinely wanted to be with her, but that person would never be Ethan. I sent both letters and waited. For a week, I heard nothing. Then my father called and requested to meet me for coffee. He sounded exhausted and older than I remembered. When we met, my father looked like he hadn't slept well. He claimed he questioned Margaret about what I had stated in my letter. Initially, she denied everything and claimed I was lying to turn him against her. But as he probed her for details about specific conversations, her story began to unravel. My father claimed that the turning point came when he asked Margaret directly if she had ever asked me to break up with Ethan. Margaret eventually revealed that she had advised that I prioritize Clara's happiness, but she argued that it was an acceptable request from one family member to another. When my father asked her why she had lied to him about Ethan and I breaking up, Margaret explained that she had been trying to spare Clara from disappointment and that she believed I would finally see things her way. She claimed she had never planned for things to get that complex. My father expressed regret that he had not believed me right away. He claimed Margaret had always been so skilled at explaining things in a way that made her appear sensible and compassionate that he had come to rely on her judgment above his own intuition. He apologized for comparing me to my biological mother and suggested we concentrate on mending our relationship. I informed my father that while I appreciated his apologies, I needed to see actual improvements before I could trust him again. I told him he needed to set limits with Margaret about her behavior toward me and Ethan, and he shouldn't expect me to sacrifice my own happiness for Clara's emotional needs. My father agreed to those conditions, but he also asked if I would consider giving the family another chance to sort things out. He stated Margaret apologized and wanted to make things right. He suggested that we all get together and have an honest conversation about what had happened. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a single family meeting. I told my father it would be at a neutral site, not their house, and that Ethan would accompany me. I also stated that if Margaret lied or tried to manipulate the situation during the discussion, I would leave without giving them another chance. The encounter was disastrous. We met at a restaurant, and Margaret had prepared an entire speech about how much she loved me and apologized for any misunderstandings. But when I pressed her to explicitly state that she had asked me to break up with Ethan, she couldn't. Instead, Margaret continued stating that she merely wanted me to think about Clara's sentiments or that she had suggested I think about what was best for the entire family. She refused to use the word breakup, despite the fact that it was exactly what she had requested me to do. Clara was even worse. She accused me of being jealous of her connection with Ethan and attempting to keep them apart because I was insecure. She said Ethan had been leading her on by being kind to her, and I was forcing him to pretend he didn't have feelings for her. Ethan eventually spoke up, telling Clara that he was never romantically interested in her and never would be. He explained that he had been kind to her as a friend and as my sister, but she had mistaken his friendship for anything more. Clara burst into tears, explaining that Ethan was only saying that because I was influencing him. Margaret sprang to Clara's defense, claiming Ethan was being unkind to a vulnerable person. She stated she couldn't imagine Ethan would reject Clara only because of her disabilities. That's when I understood that nothing had changed. Margaret and Clara were still living a fantasy in which Ethan secretly desired to be with Clara, but was thwarted by mean, selfish me. They had learned nothing from the previous few months of conflict. I stepped up to leave, but my father encouraged me to stay and keep trying. He stated that families should work through their problems rather than giving up when things were unpleasant. I informed him that I had tried to sort out the problem, but Margaret and Clara refused to accept reality. As we walked out of the restaurant, Margaret told me that she would never give up on her daughter's happiness. She stated I could go away as my real mother did, but she would always fight for Clara. That comment was the last straw for me. Margaret saw me as a hindrance to Clara's happiness rather than as the daughter she was expected to love and protect. No matter what I did or how much I sacrificed, it would never be enough because Margaret would always choose Clara's desires over mine. Ethan and I left town the following day. We were intending to relocate anyway because Ethan had received a job offer in another city. The work paid better and provided us with a fresh start away from the family strife. We've been here for 6 weeks, and it's been serene. No manipulative phone calls, no guilt trips about family loyalty, and no one asking me to give up my happiness for someone else's. Ethan enjoys his new career, and I found work at a marketing agency that is far superior to my previous position. My father has called a few times. Our conversations have been cordial but distant. He keeps hoping that I will change my mind regarding Margaret and Clara, but I have made it obvious that this will not happen. I told him he was free to visit us here if he wanted to keep a connection with me, but I would not be returning to deal with Margaret's manipulation. Margaret sent me a farewell text message last week. She expressed her wish that I was content with my decision to leave my family for a man who would most likely abandon me ultimately. She claimed Clara was heartbroken and blamed me for being selfish and harsh. After that, I blocked her number. I also blocked Clara, who had been messaging me about how unjust I was being and how much I was harming the family by remaining away. The point is, I no longer feel guilty. For years, I accepted that my position in the family was to be understanding, adaptable, and willing to make sacrifices for Clara's needs. I assumed it was what good sisters did and what appreciative daughters owed their stepmother. But now, I understand that Margaret never considered me her daughter. She regarded me as a resource that Clara might profit from. When I ceased being useful in that way, she was willing to spread lies about me, damage my relationship, and attempt to harm my reputation. Clara never thought of me as her sister. She regarded me as a competitor for Ethan's attention and finally as a barrier to obtaining what she desired. She was willing to take part in Margaret's deception and manipulation because it served her interests. My father was so committed to keeping the harmony in his household that he was willing to compromise my well-being rather than confront Margaret's actions. He wanted me to continue absorbing Margaret's manipulation, so he wouldn't have to cope with the conflict of confronting her. None of that was love, despite everyone's claims. Love does not require you to give up your happiness for someone else's convenience. Love does not force you to accept falsehoods and manipulation in order to maintain family unity. I'm starting a new life with individuals that genuinely care about my well-being. Ethan has never asked me to give up anything for his benefit, and he has never lied to me or attempted to manipulate me. This is what a healthy relationship looks like. I'm not sure if my father will ever comprehend what happened or if he'll always blame me for splitting up the family, but I have no influence over his choices. I can only manage my own actions. Therefore, I prefer to surround myself with people that treat me with respect and honesty. Update 3. I am writing this final update to bring this chapter of my life to an end and to address some of the issues that have been raised. It's been 6 months since I moved away with Ethan, and I can honestly say that it was the best decision I ever made. Life here has been good. Ethan was promoted at his job, and we are saving money to buy a house. I work for a company where my supervisor values my abilities and does not have to deal with family members contacting about bogus problems. We've become friends with our neighbors and joined a hiking group. I never imagined I could have such a normal, quiet existence. My father came to visit us twice. The first visit was unpleasant because he kept bringing up Margaret and Clara, asking whether I missed them and if I was willing to forgive them. He appeared to assume that I had had enough time to recover from what had transpired. I had to explain that this was not about harboring grudges, but about protecting oneself from people who have demonstrated a willingness to lie and mislead in order to obtain their desired outcome. The second appointment went well. My father seemed to realize I wasn't coming back, so he stopped trying to persuade me to reconcile with Margaret and Clara. We talked about other things for a few hours, and it felt like we were back in our typical father-daughter connection. He stated he was proud of the life Ethan and I were creating together. But my father also told me several things that reinforced I had made the right decision to leave. Apparently, once I moved away, Clara was confident Ethan would realize he missed her and return for her. Margaret reinforced this dream, suggesting they drive to our new city to surprise him. My father put a halt to that idea, but only because he was concerned about how it would appear if they arrived unexpectedly. He didn't seem to grasp that the idea was unacceptable because Ethan had expressed his feelings clearly, and stalking someone is wrong no matter how it appears. Margaret also began telling others in their social circle that I had turned against the family because I couldn't accept Clara's happiness. According to my father, she was portraying herself as the patient mother whose disabled child was being bullied by a jealous stepsister. Some people believed her narrative, which was not surprising to me. Clara eventually began dating someone she met in an online support group for people with disabilities. My father claimed she seemed pleased with this new person, and Margaret was overjoyed that Clara was finally receiving the attention she deserved. Apparently, neither of them recognized the irony in Clara's ability to find someone who wanted to be with her once she quit obsessing over Ethan. My father asked if I would consider congratulating Clara on her new relationship. I told him no. Clara had cooperated in Margaret's attempts to manipulate and control my life, and she had never apologized or admitted her mistakes. The fact that she had discovered pleasure did not excuse her previous actions. Margaret attempted one final manipulation about 3 months ago. She messaged me through my father, stating Clara was getting married and asked me to be her maid of honor. The message stated that here was my opportunity to be the bigger person and demonstrate that family was more important than previous arguments. I informed my dad to tell Margaret that I would not be attending Clara's wedding in any manner. I also told him that if Margaret attempted to contact me again through him or anyone else, I would cut off contact with him as well. I had set clear boundaries, and I was not going to let Margaret continue to break them just because she wore a bridal gown during her manipulation. My father was disappointed, but said he understood. He also confessed that he thought Margaret's request was improper considering what had occurred. It was the first time he had directly critiqued Margaret's behavior, and it meant a lot to me that he could now see her clearly. Clara got married 2 weeks ago. My father gave me a snapshot from the wedding, and Clara appeared to be truly delighted with her new spouse. I was happy for her, but I did not regret not being present. That wedding reflected a family that had never seen me as anything more than a tool for Clara's advantage. Ethan and I are getting engaged next month. We're arranging a small ceremony for a few close friends. My father will be invited, but Margaret and Clara will not. I've learned that you get to select who observes the most significant moments in your life, and I choose to surround myself with individuals who have earned the right to be present. Some may believe I'm being overly harsh, or that I should have tried more to make things work with my family. But I knew that pushing harder would have only resulted in more manipulation and abuse. Margaret would never have ceased attempting to control my life for Clara's sake. Clara would never have stopped considering me as a barrier to her happiness. The truth is that Margaret and Clara did not love me. They appreciated what I could do for them and made their lives easier. When I ceased being useful in that way, they were willing to spread lies about me, undermine my relationship, and isolate me from anyone who supported me. My father adored me, but he cherished his tranquil household more. He was willing to risk my safety to avoid disagreement with Margaret. That is not the love I deserved. And it is not the love I am ready to accept any longer. I don't wake up every morning wondering what manipulation Margaret will try next or what emotional crisis Clara will have if she doesn't get her way. I don't have to walk on eggshells or give up my own needs to keep the peace. I don't have to pretend that lies, misunderstandings, or abuse constitute love. Instead, I wake up next to someone who has never asked me to be less than myself for his benefit. I work in an environment where my efforts are valued. My friends respect and support my boundaries and decisions. I have an honest relationship with my father, even if we are not as close as we once were. This is what happens when you refuse to accept hurtful treatment from those who pretend to love you. This is what it looks like when you prioritize your personal well-being over others' comfort. I'm not telling my story to gain sympathy or to persuade anyone that I made the correct decision. I'm publishing it because I wish someone had told me years ago that family members that control and lie to you aren't behaving out of love, regardless of what they claim. I wish someone had warned me that leaving toxic people does not mean giving up on family. It's about protecting yourself so you may have healthy relationships. If family members are asking you to sacrifice your happiness for someone else's benefit, or if individuals are lying about you to get what they want, you do not have to stay and accept it. You do not owe somebody your peace of mind or well-being simply because you share DNA or were raised by them. Margaret cared for me for many years, and I'm grateful. But appreciation does not imply that I had to let her dictate my adult life or ruin my relationship. Clara is disabled and experiences obstacles that I do not have to cope with, and I feel compassion for her. However, her challenges did not grant her the right to my lover or to join in attempts to manipulate me. My father worked hard to provide for our family when my biological mother departed, and I am grateful for everything he did. But his sacrifices did not imply that I had to sacrifice myself to keep his second wife happy. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most will harm you the most because they believe their love gives them the power to control you. Sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve yourself. I don't think Margaret, Clara, or my father will ever realize what they did wrong. I'm not sure whether they will ever recognize that their treatment of me was wrong and detrimental, but I don't need their understanding or apologies to move on with my life. I have Ethan, who treats me like a partner rather than a possession. My friends respect my boundaries. My skills are valued at my current employment. I have a future that belongs to me, not to others who believe they know what is best for me. That is enough. That is more than enough. That was all I needed. But I was reluctant to ask for it because I believed I owed others my loyalty, even if they didn't deserve it. If anyone reading this is coping with family members who manipulate, lie, or attempt to dominate their lives, please know that you deserve better. You deserve partnerships based on respect and honesty. You deserve the freedom to make your own life decisions without having to deal with the emotions of others. You do not need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to give up your happiness to express your love. You do not have to stay in hurtful situations simply because it is difficult to leave. This is my final update because this chapter of my life has concluded. I'm no longer the girl who tries to make everyone happy at her own expense. I am not the daughter who tolerated manipulation because she was grateful for a roof over her head. I'm not the sister who prioritizes someone else's desires over her own. I'm simply Olivia, building a life with someone who loves me unconditionally and making decisions based on what's best for me rather than what's easier for others. It took longer than it should have, but I got here. And if you're reading this and see yourself in my tale, you can do it too.